Lord have mercy. What is that?
Ruth Ingram had stepped outside to fetch firewood when she saw him. A shape half buried in the snowdrift behind her shack. A white boy, maybe 20, lips blue, barely breathing. She dropped the logs and ran.
Son, are you fine?
His eyes cracked open, a whisper, broken.
Please, help me.
I got you. Hold on.
Ruth was 68, black, widowed, 3 weeks from losing her home. The eviction notice still frozen to her doorframe. She just lifted him out of the snow and dragged him inside. Didn't know his last name was painted on the side of half the trucks in America. Didn't know that saving his life would change hers forever. But what would shock her more than anything? By sunrise, 12 luxury SUVs would be parked right outside her shack. Ruth dragged him through the door and kicked it shut against the wind. The boy was heavier than he looked, dead weight, soaked through, his coat stiff with frost. She lowered him onto the rag rug in front of the wood stove and dropped to her knees beside him. His skin was the wrong color, gray under the blue. She'd seen that color once before, on her husband Elias, the morning he didn't wake up. Not tonight, not on her floor. She peeled off his coat with shaking hands. Underneath, his shirt was wet from the snow that had melted against his chest. She stripped that, too. Found a thin gold chain around his neck. Found a wallet, thick with cards she didn't recognize. Black, platinum, no names she could read in the dim light. She set the wallet aside without opening it. That wasn't her business. Keeping him alive was. From the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, she pulled out the blue wool blanket. Elias had bought it the winter they got married, 43 years ago. She hadn't used it since he passed. Tonight, she wrapped it around the stranger's shoulders. "You hold on now," she whispered. "You hold on here." She put the kettle on. Boiled water. Soaked clean rags and pressed them against his wrists, his neck, the soles of his bare feet. His shoes had come off somewhere out in the snow. She didn't know where. Didn't matter. She rubbed warmth back into him for an hour, then another. The wind hammered the windows, the wood stove ticked. The boy's breathing slowly steadied, from threads to whispers, from whispers to something that almost sounded like sleep. Ruth sat back on her heels. Her knees ached, her back ached. She was 68 and she had just done the work of someone half her age. She didn't care. She heated a can of chicken soup, her last can, and spooned a few drops between his lips. He swallowed, once, then again. A good sign. Then she sat in the rocking chair beside him and watched him sleep. She didn't know who he was. Didn't know where he'd come from. Didn't know why a boy dressed like that was out in a Vermont blizzard with no car, no phone, no shoes. But she knew the look of a child who had nobody coming for him. She'd been that child once. In the soft yellow light of the kerosene lamp, she could see him better now. Maybe 20 years old, pale even with the warmth coming back. Long lashes, a small white scar above his left eyebrow, the kind a boy gets falling off a bicycle at 8 years old. Some mother had kissed that scar a long time ago, Ruth thought. Some mother had loved this boy. She wondered, briefly, where that mother was now. The kettle whistled again. Ruth made herself a cup of chicory coffee, couldn't afford real coffee, hadn't been able to for 2 years, and sat back down. She talked to the boy the way she used to talk to Elias when he was sick. Quiet, steady. Not really words, just the sound of a voice in the dark, so he'd know he wasn't alone. She told him about her garden, about the tomatoes that grew despite everything, about the cardinal that came to her windowsill every morning, about Elias, who could fix anything with 2 screws and a prayer. She told him the soup was her mother's recipe. She told him he was safe. She didn't know if he heard her. She didn't need him to. Sometime around 4 in the morning, the boy stirred. His eyes opened, pale blue, focused on her face for the first time. Confused, afraid. "Where?" His voice cracked. "Easy, baby, you're safe. You're in my house." "Who?" "Name's Ruth. Don't matter right now. You sleep." His eyes searched her face. Whatever he saw there made him let go. He closed his eyes again. Within a minute, his breathing deepened into real sleep. Ruth sat in her rocking chair until the first gray light came through the window. She did not know that, by the time the sun rose, 12 black SUVs would be moving north along the highway, fast, in formation, headlights cutting through the last of the storm. Looking for him. Morning came thin and gray. Ruth wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch to fetch more firewood. The storm had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the world buried. 3 feet of snow against the side of her shack. The road completely vanished. The pine trees bowed under the weight of it. She looked up at her own roof and saw what she'd been trying not to see for 2 years. The tarp she'd nailed over the leak in the kitchen ceiling had torn loose in the wind, flapping against the side of the house like a broken wing. She closed her eyes, then got to work. She chopped through the ice on the woodpile with Elias's old axe. Her arms shook by the 3rd swing. The wood was frozen solid. It took 40 minutes to fill her arms with enough logs to last the day. On her way back to the porch, her eye caught the envelope nailed to the doorframe. White, official, half buried in ice. The county seal in the corner. She didn't need to read it again. She'd read it 11 times already. Final notice of foreclosure. Property taxes delinquent. 21 days to pay $4,820 or vacate the premises. Ruth had $312 in a coffee can under her sink. Social Security wouldn't come for 9 days. $968? Not even close. She had spent the last 2 years selling everything that wasn't nailed down. Her wedding ring last spring. Elias's hunting rifle the spring before that. Her mother's good china, piece by piece, at the flea market on Route 9. Nothing left to sell. She set the firewood down inside the door and looked at the boy still sleeping under the blue blanket. She had used her last can of soup on him. She didn't regret it. A memory bloomed while she filled the wood stove. 3 months ago, the county clerk's office in town. A woman behind the counter, 20 years younger than Ruth, with reading glasses on a chain and a mouth that pinched whenever she spoke. "Miss Ingram, there's no payment plan for property taxes this far behind. My husband, he handled the papers. After he passed, I didn't—" "Ma'am, that was 11 years ago." "I know how long it's been." "Then you've had plenty of time to—" "I had a husband who got sick. I had bills." The clerk had looked at her over the reading glasses with an expression Ruth knew well. The expression that said, "Not my problem." Ruth had walked the 4 miles home in the rain. She shook the memory off and put the kettle on a second time. Through the window, she could see her neighbor Lillian Davis trudging up the path in thick boots, carrying a covered pot in both hands. Lillian was the only person in town who came up Old Crow Road on purpose. 62 years old, white, kind in a quiet way that didn't ask for thanks. Ruth opened the door before Lillian could knock. "Brought you some stew," Lillian said. Her cheeks were red from the cold. "Made too much. You always make too much. Funny how that happens." Lillian stepped inside, stamping snow off her boots, and stopped cold when she saw the boy on the rug. "Ruth?" "Found him last night, in the drift behind the shack. He was near dead." "You called somebody?" "Phone's been out since November. You know that." Lillian set the pot down on the table slowly. Her face had gone tight. "Ruth, honey, Sheriff Whitaker's cruiser been driving up this road 3-4 times a week. Past 2 months. Lillian, I don't have time for—" "He's been parking on the ridge, with binoculars. Bill Hendricks saw him." I'm telling you because something ain't right. Ruth looked at her old friend for a long moment. Lillian, I got 21 days till the county takes my house. I got a frozen boy on my floor. I got $300 to my name. What you want me to do about a sheriff with binoculars? Lillian had no answer. She squeezed Ruth's hand instead and slipped back out into the snow. Ruth watched her friend disappear down the path. The boy stirred behind her on the rug, mumbled something in his sleep, settled again. She turned back to him and pulled the blue blanket up around his shoulders. It was just past 8 in the morning when Ruth heard the engines. Not one, not two, many. A deep, layered hum coming up Old Crow Road, a road no plow had touched in 3 days. Ruth set down the cup she was washing, walked to the window, pulled back the curtain. A line of black SUVs was crawling through the snow toward her shack. 6, 8, 10, 12. Polished black, identical, headlights still on against the gray morning. They moved in formation like something out of a movie she'd never have paid to watch. Behind her, the boy stirred on the rug. He hadn't woken fully, but somewhere in his sleep his hand reached up and gripped a corner of the blue blanket. Ruth opened her front door. The lead SUV stopped 20 feet from her porch. Doors opened all the way down the line. Men in dark coats stepped out. 6, 8, 10 of them. Earpieces visible, eyes scanning the tree line before they ever looked at her. Then, from the second vehicle, a tall man in a long charcoal overcoat stepped out and walked straight toward her shack. He moved like a man who had not slept in 2 days. He stopped at the bottom of her porch steps. Gray at the temples, maybe 55, the kind of face that had been on magazine covers without trying to be. Ma'am, my name is Gregory Anderson. My son went missing 36 hours ago. The last ping from his phone came from somewhere within a mile of this property. Have you seen? He stopped. He had just looked past her, through the open door into the shack. He had just seen the boy on the rug under the blue blanket. Gregory Anderson, a man whose name Ruth would later learn was on the side of half the freight trucks in America, put one hand against her doorframe to steady himself. His shoulders dropped 2 inches. He closed his eyes. For 3 seconds, he was not the most powerful man in northern Vermont. He was a father. When he opened his eyes again, his voice was steadier, but only just. That's my son. Yes, sir, I figured. Is he? He's alive. He's been sleeping since about 4. Fever broke around 6. Gregory Anderson stepped past her into the shack. 2 of his men moved to follow. He held up one hand without turning around, and they stopped where they stood. He crossed the small room slowly, knelt down beside his son, brushed a strand of hair off the boy's forehead with 2 fingers, careful, almost afraid to touch. His hand was trembling. He said something Ruth couldn't hear. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips against the boy's temple and held them there. When he stood up, his eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. He turned to Ruth, and then he saw the rest of the room. The duct tape across the cracked window, the torn corner of the kitchen ceiling where the tarp had blown loose, the wood stove with its missing handle, the half slice of bread wrapped in foil set aside on the table for the boy when he woke, the eviction notice still frozen to her doorframe, visible through the open door behind him. Gregory Anderson, billionaire, founder of Anderson Logistics, a man whose lawyers ate breakfast in Manhattan boardrooms, stood in the middle of that shack and understood, in real time, what kind of woman had just saved his son's life. His jaw worked once. He looked at Ruth. What's your name, ma'am? Ruth. Ruth Ingram. Miss Ingram. He didn't say anything else. Not yet. He just held out his hand, and after a moment, Ruth took it. Gregory Anderson made phone calls from Ruth's porch. He stood out there for 20 minutes in the cold, ear pressed to his phone, voice low and clipped. Ruth caught fragments through the door. Helicopter. Medical team. Burlington Regional. No press, no statement. I'll handle this personally. When he came back inside, a doctor was already trudging up the path behind him. A man in a long blue coat carrying a hard-shell medical case. One of the SUVs had been carrying him the whole time. They'd come prepared for the worst. The doctor checked Caleb's vitals on the rug. Pulse strong. Temperature 98.4. Mild frostbite on 2 toes, nothing that wouldn't heal. He'd been severely hypothermic when Ruth pulled him in, the doctor said. Core temperature had likely dropped below 90. Another 20 minutes outside, the heart would have started arrhythmia. Another 40, dead. Gregory Anderson heard those words and turned his face to the window for a long moment. His hand found the doorframe again. Then the boy opened his eyes. Dad? I'm here, son. I'm here. How did you... Tracked your phone. Don't move yet. The boy, Caleb, Ruth learned when Gregory spoke his name, tried to sit up and failed. He looked around the small room slowly. Saw the wood stove, saw the blue blanket across his legs, saw Ruth standing in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands. His eyes filled. You, he said. It was you. It was me, baby. I thought, his voice broke. I thought I was going to die out there. My car spun off the highway. I couldn't get a signal. I just kept walking. I don't even remember knocking. I don't remember falling. I just remember a hand on my face. I know, son. I know you did. You didn't die. You're here. Caleb cried then, quietly, the way young men cry when they've been holding something in too long. His father knelt beside him and put a hand on the back of his head and said nothing. Ruth turned away to give them the moment and busied herself with the kettle. When she came back with 3 cups of chicory coffee on a tin tray, both men had their composure back. Gregory took the cup, sipped, did not flinch at the taste. Ruth noticed. She filed it away. Miss Ingram, he said, may I speak with you outside for a moment? They stood on the porch. The doctor was inside, helping Caleb into dry clothes someone had brought from the SUVs. Gregory Anderson took a slow breath, then reached inside his coat and pulled out a leather checkbook and a fountain pen. I'd like you to name a number, he said. Any number. There is no figure that would be inappropriate. You saved my son's life. Ruth looked at him. Mr. Anderson, put that away. Ma'am, I put it away. Please. Gregory Anderson, who had not been told, please put that away, by anyone in 20 years, slowly lowered the checkbook. I did not save your boy for a check, Ruth said. Her voice was level. I saved him because he was somebody's, same as anybody else would be. Most people would not have. Then most people ought to be ashamed. A long silence. The wind moved through the pines. Gregory tried again, more carefully this time. I noticed the notice on your door. I'd be surprised if you didn't. Let me pay the taxes. No. Miss Ingram, no, sir. I won't have it said in this town that I cashed in on a half-dead boy. You hear me? That ain't who I am. That ain't who he is. I'll lose the house before I let it be that. Gregory looked at her. Really looked. For the first time. And in his face, Ruth saw something she had not expected. Respect. Not pity. Not gratitude. Respect. Through the open window behind them, Caleb's voice, weak but clear. Dad, stop! Both of them turned. Caleb was sitting up now, propped against the rocking chair, the blue blanket pulled tight around his shoulders. She doesn't need rescuing. She just rescued me. The words hit Gregory Anderson the way a thrown stone hits a window. He stood very still for several seconds. Then he turned back to Ruth and his whole approach changed. All right, he said quietly. Then let me ask differently. Not what I can give you, What do you actually want, Miss Ingram? Ruth thought about it. The wind moved her shawl. She looked out across the snow toward the road no one had plowed for her in 11 years. The road she had walked 4 miles into town on in the rain to be told, "Not my problem." "I want to be left alone in my own house," she said. "That's all." Gregory Anderson nodded. Once, he took out his phone and dialed a number from memory. Speaker on. "Margaret, I need you to do something for me right now." A woman's voice came through, brisk and awake even at that hour. "Go." "I'm at a property in Caledonia County, Vermont. Owner is Ruth Ingram. There's a delinquent property tax balance of—" He glanced at Ruth. "How much, Miss Ingram?" $4,820. $4,820. I want it paid current today, through the company, not as a gift, as a consulting fee. Consulting fee for what? Emergency medical hosting. Miss Ingram saved Caleb's life last night. She kept him stable until I could reach him. That's worth far more than the back taxes. We're paying for services rendered. A pause on the line. Understood. And Margaret, make sure the paperwork reflects that. I don't want this woman written into any narrative she didn't choose. Got it. Gregory ended the call and put the phone back in his pocket. Ruth stood very still on the porch. For the first time in 9 days, she could feel her shoulders drop. The lump in her chest she had been carrying for 11 years, the one that woke her up at 3 a.m. with the math of dollars she did not have, loosened. She did not cry. She had not cried in front of a white man since she was 19 years old, and she was not about to start. But she nodded. And Gregory Anderson, billionaire, founder of Anderson Logistics, a man whose lawyers ate breakfast in Manhattan boardrooms, nodded back. For the first time, they were even. 3 days passed. Caleb refused to be moved to a hotel, refused the Burlington apartment his father offered, refused gently but firmly every alternative arrangement Gregory's people proposed. He wanted to stay at Ruth's shack until he could walk without leaning on the wall. Ruth said nothing for or against. She just set an extra plate at the table. Gregory drove up Old Crow Road every morning at 9. Sometimes he stayed for breakfast. Sometimes he sat on the porch with a cup of chicory coffee that he had stopped pretending to dislike. He and Caleb spoke in low voices about things Ruth did not eavesdrop on. The music program at Overland, the company Caleb was supposed to inherit, the fight they had been having for 2 years that had ended with Caleb getting in a car and driving north until the highway iced over. Whatever was said between them, it was being said. That was enough. By the second evening, Caleb could stand without help. By the third, he was carrying logs in from the porch. Slowly, but on his own. Ruth let him. She knew the look of a young man who needed to feel useful again. On the third night, Lillian came up the path with another pot of stew. She saw Caleb at the kitchen table peeling potatoes. She saw Gregory Anderson, in shirt sleeves of all things, wiping down Ruth's wood stove with a damp rag. She caught Ruth's eye across the room and gave her a look that said the world has lost its mind. Ruth almost smiled. After Lillian left, Ruth sat alone on the porch with her cup. The cold was sharp. The stars were out. The blue blanket, folded now, returned to the back of the rocking chair where it belonged, looked in the lamplight through the window like something that finally remembered how to be useful again. The final notice was gone from her doorframe. In its place, folded carefully into a tin box in her kitchen, was a single sheet of paper stamped, "Paid in full." Ruth looked out across her snowy yard for a long time. She did not yet know that the very next morning, a sheriff's cruiser would be the first vehicle up Old Crow Road, and it would not be coming with stew. It came on a Tuesday. The sheriff's cruiser crunched up the snow at 10:15 a.m., followed by a beige county sedan with a state seal on the door. Ruth saw them from the window and felt the back of her neck go cold. A thin man in a cheap suit climbed out of the sedan with a clipboard. He looked at Ruth's shack the way a tax assessor looks at anything, like a problem to be measured. He climbed the porch steps without knocking. "Miss Ruth Ingram?" "That's me." "You've been served." He handed her a folder. He did not say goodbye. He walked back to his sedan and drove away. Ruth read the first page twice before her hands stopped wanting to shake. Notice of eminent domain. Caledonia County had voted unanimously at a closed session meeting Ruth had not been notified of to acquire her property for a regional emergency services corridor. She had 30 days to vacate. Compensation, $32,000. Market rate, the document said. Final and non-negotiable. The land, 5 acres, the only thing Elias had ever owned, was worth 4 times that. Caleb was in the kitchen. He saw her face and stood up. "Ruth?" She handed him the folder without speaking. Within 10 minutes, he had Gregory on the phone. Within 30, Gregory's SUV was back in her drive. Within 40, Margaret Holloway, Anderson's attorney, was on speakerphone from her Manhattan office, reading the document line by line in a voice that grew quieter the longer she read. "This is a targeted seizure," Margaret said. "This isn't standard procedure. This was prepared months ago. The language is too specific. They've been waiting." Gregory's jaw tightened. "Who signed it?" Margaret read the names. Sheriff Harold Whitaker, Mayor Daniel Brooks. Then Lillian arrived, winded, white-faced, and the picture clicked into place. "They did this to the Coopers, Ruth, 2 years ago. Took the back 12 acres, built nothing. They did it to the Hendersons before that. They did it to old Reuben Walker before he died. All black families, all on this side of the county. Nobody had the money to fight." "Margaret," Gregory said into the phone, "pull every eminent domain filing in Caledonia County for the last 10 years. I want names, addresses, race, what happened to the land afterward, by Friday." On it, that same evening, 20 miles south, Sheriff Harold Whitaker sat down to dinner. His house was modest, 2-bedroom ranch on the edge of town. His wife Carolyn set a plate of pot roast in front of him without speaking. Their daughter Emily, 20, home from community college on winter break, ate quickly with her headphones in. On the wall behind Whitaker's chair, 3 framed photographs. His grandfather in a sheriff's uniform from 1958, hand on the shoulder of a chestnut horse. His father in uniform from 1981, cutting a ribbon at the new firehouse. Himself sworn in by the same county judge 23 years ago. 3 generations of order. "You're quiet tonight," Carolyn said. "Anderson Logistics is up at the Ingram place, the old man himself." Carolyn paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. She set it down. "Harold, I know. Is this one going to be different?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the photographs, he looked at his wife, then he looked at his plate. "My granddaddy held this county together when nobody else would. My daddy did the same. Half these properties up that road. They're tax burdens, code violations, old folks dying off, no family coming back. Somebody's got to keep this town standing, Carolyn. If it ain't me, it's nobody." Carolyn looked at him for a long, long moment. Then she stood up, took her own plate, and walked to the sink. Whitaker finished his dinner alone. The next morning, his cruiser came up Old Crow Road for what he hoped would be the last time. Ruth was sitting on the porch when he arrived. Gregory and Caleb were inside. Whitaker climbed the steps with his hat in his hand. He had perfected over 23 years the friendly smile that made his eyes look kind even when nothing kind was behind them. "Miss Ingram, hate to bother you on a cold morning." "Sheriff, I imagine you've seen the paperwork." "I have. I want you to know, ma'am, I asked them to bring that to you personally. As a courtesy, some folks get blindsided." "How thoughtful." He chose to ignore the tone. Miss Ingram, I'd encourage you to take the settlement. 32,000 is more than most folks see in a year up here. You take that money, you find yourself a nice apartment in Burlington, you live comfortable. You fight this, it gets ugly. Lawyers, liens, title searches that turn up old debts nobody remembered. Things can get complicated, Miss Ingram, for folks who don't have resources. I've seen it happen too many times. I'm trying to spare you. Truly. He believed it. That was the worst part. He stood there on her porch in his pressed uniform and genuinely believed he was offering her mercy. He believed his grandfather would have done the same. He believed it was kindness. Behind Ruth, the screen door opened. Gregory Anderson stepped out onto the porch. Sheriff Whitaker's face went through several expressions in quick succession. None of them were the friendly smile. "Sheriff," Gregory said. His voice was very quiet. "I don't believe we've been introduced." Whitaker recovered fast, but not fast enough. "Mr. Anderson, I'd heard you were in the area." "Have you?" "I was just expressing my concern for Miss Ingram. This proceeding it's complex. I wouldn't want her to be taken advantage of." "By whom, Sheriff?" Whitaker opened his mouth, closed it, touched the brim of his hat, stepped back off the porch. "You folks have a good morning." He drove away. Ruth went back inside without speaking. She sat down at her kitchen table. The folder lay where Caleb had left it, the words, "Notice of eminent domain," facing up. Her shoulders began to shake. Not violently, just enough. She did not make a sound. She had not made a sound, for sorrow, in 11 years. Not since the morning she buried Elias in the small cemetery behind the Methodist church. But she sat there with her hands pressed flat to the table and her shoulders shaking, and Caleb sat down beside her, and he did not say a word. He just stayed. By Friday, Margaret Holloway had what she needed. She flew up from Manhattan in a private plane and drove herself the last 40 miles in a rental Subaru because, she said, she did not want to arrive at a Vermont shack in a town car. She parked in Ruth's drive at 1 in the afternoon with a leather briefcase and a stack of file folders an inch thick. She set the folders down on Ruth's kitchen table. 23 properties, she said. Caledonia County, last 9 years. All seized under public corridor or emergency services pretext. Compensation paid was on average 28% of appraised market value. Of the 23 properties, 21 belonged to Black or Latino residents over the age of 60. The other 2 belonged to elderly white widows. Not one of the projects justifying these seizures was ever built. Not one. Gregory leaned over the table. "Where did the land go?" "That's the part I'd like Caleb to help with." Caleb looked up from the rocking chair, surprised. "Me? Your father tells me you spent 2 summers interning at the commercial property unit. You have a county records login. Anderson Logistics owns the database I'd otherwise need to subpoena for, and that takes weeks. You have access today." Caleb opened his laptop. For the next 40 minutes, the room was quiet except for keystrokes and the wood stove ticking. Ruth made a fresh pot of chicory coffee. Lillian came up the path and took a seat at the table without being asked. Gregory paced near the window. Then Caleb stopped typing. He stared at the screen for several seconds. "Margaret, pull up Pinecrest Holdings." Margaret tapped her own laptop. "Pinecrest Holdings, LLC, registered in Vermont, single member, P.O. Box 412, Burlington." That's the same P.O. box as the petitioner of record on every one of those 23 seizures. A beat. "You're sure?" "I cross-referenced all 23 filings. Every single one routes through P.O. Box 412. Every single one is signed off by Whitaker as enforcement, Brooks as authorizing official, and every single property, every single one, was sold within 90 days to Pinecrest Holdings at the same 28% valuation the county paid the owner." Ruth set down her cup. "Who's behind Pinecrest?" Caleb scrolled, tapped, squinted. Registered agent is one Mark Brooks, listed home address, 84 Cedar Lane, Burlington, Vermont. Lillian's mouth fell open. That's the mayor's brother-in-law. Margaret closed her own laptop slowly. All right, she said. Now I have a case. Ruth had not said anything for a while. She was looking at the stack of file folders, 23 of them, each one a family, each one a story like hers, except no one had come up the road in 12 black SUVs to ask if they were okay. She stood up. I want to meet them. Gregory looked at her. Miss Ingram, not for me, Mr. Anderson, for them. They need to know somebody's listening now. By Sunday evening, 12 people were crowded into Ruth's living room. Frances Cooper, 81, in a wheelchair pushed by her grandson. James Henderson, 74, who had lost the maple grove his father had tapped for 40 years. Reuben Walker's widow, Beatrice, holding the original deed her husband had signed in 1962. Two more families Ruth had only known by name. Lillian poured coffee in mismatched mugs. Ruth stood by the wood stove. We're not asking for charity, she said. We're asking for what's ours. Mr. Anderson here and Miss Holloway, they've got the means to fight this. But this story has to be told by us, not by them, by us. You hear me? Heads nodded around the room. Slowly, then less slowly. Frances Cooper, 81 years old, looked at Ruth across the small room. Ruth Ingram, I've known you 42 years. You ain't never asked nobody for nothing. Why now? Ruth thought about it. Because a stranger came to my door, Frances, and I let him in. And turns out, the world don't always punish you for that. Sometimes it surprises you. Frances's eyes filled. She nodded once. She didn't say anything else. That night, after everyone had gone home, Ruth and Margaret stood on the porch. Miss Ingram, Margaret said, there's a town hall scheduled for Wednesday evening. Routine business, mayor presiding. I'd like you to come. Why? Because what's about to happen in that room ought to happen with you in it. Not for the world to see you, so the world has to look at you. There's a difference. Ruth looked out across the snow toward the road. I'll come. The Caledonia County Town Hall was a brick building from 1936 with a tin steeple and a wood-paneled meeting room that held maybe 120 people. Wednesday night, every seat was filled. Word had moved through the county the way news moves in small towns, over coffee, over fences, over party-line phones. Frances Cooper had told her bridge club. James Henderson had told his church. Lillian had quietly mentioned to the editor of the local paper that something might be worth covering on Wednesday. By 6 p.m., people who hadn't been to a town hall in 20 years were standing in the back. Mayor Daniel Brooks took the podium at 6:30 in a navy suit that did not quite fit. Sheriff Whitaker sat in the front row, hands folded, jaw set. The mayor opened the meeting with a procedural matter about snowplow contracts. Nobody listened. At 6:42, the back doors opened. Margaret Holloway walked in first, briefcase in hand, dressed like she had business to conduct. Behind her, the local newspaper editor, Evelyn Brooks Sutton, a distant cousin of the mayor, with a press credential clipped to her coat and a digital recorder in her hand. Behind her, Gregory Anderson, in a dark wool overcoat. Behind him, Caleb. And at the back of the small procession, walking slowly but holding her head up, Ruth Ingram, in her Sunday coat and her grandmother's pearls. The room went very still. Mayor Brooks's voice faltered mid-sentence. Margaret stepped forward. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to request the floor for public comment. This isn't on the agenda. I'm aware. I'm requesting it under Vermont Open Meeting Statute, Section 1015. You're required to grant it. Sheriff Whitaker shifted in his seat. The mayor stared. Then he nodded because there was nothing else to do. Gregory Anderson took the microphone. He did not raise his voice. He never did. My name is Gregory Anderson. 5 nights ago, my son nearly died of exposure 2 miles from this town. The woman who saved his life is named Ruth Ingram. She is 68 years old. She had not eaten a full meal in 2 days when she opened her door to a stranger. She didn't know who he was. She didn't ask. She didn't bargain. She didn't wait to find out whether he was worth the trouble. She just opened the door. He let that sit for a moment. While she was saving his life, this office, he turned slightly toward the mayor, was preparing the paperwork to seize her home. A ripple went through the room. That seizure is not an isolated incident. Miss Holloway, please. Margaret stepped forward with a remote in her hand. A projector screen at the front of the room came alive. What followed lasted 11 minutes. The screen showed, in order, the list of 23 properties seized in Caledonia County over the past 9 years. The names of every family, the address of every parcel, the compensation paid, always between 23 and 29% of appraised value, the date of every seizure, the date of every subsequent resale to Pinecrest Holdings, LLC, the registered agent of Pinecrest, Mark Brooks, the home address of Mark Brooks, 84 Cedar Lane, Burlington, and beside it, in smaller text, Mayor Daniel Brooks's tax filings listing Mark Brooks as his sister's husband. The room did not make a sound. The mayor's face had gone the color of paper. Margaret continued, quietly. In each of these 23 cases, the public purpose justifying the seizure was never built. There is no emergency services corridor. There is no regional bypass. There is no flood mitigation easement. There is only the land, sold every time for cents on the dollar to one corporation controlled by one family. This is not eminent domain. This is theft conducted under the seal of this office for over 9 years. She turned to Gregory. He turned to the room. And I want it on the record, he said, that the link between these seizures and Pinecrest Holdings was not identified by my legal team. It was identified by my son. From Miss Ingram's kitchen table. Caleb did not stand. He just nodded once when his father looked at him. Gregory turned back to the room. He looked at the families in the front rows. The Coopers, the Hendersons, Beatrice Walker holding the deed her husband had signed in 1962. He looked at Sheriff Whitaker, who was no longer looking at anyone. His voice softened. 5 nights ago, a 68-year-old woman who had nothing left to give gave everything she had to a stranger in the snow. She didn't ask his name before saving his life. He paused. Now we listen. He set the microphone down. The door at the back of the meeting room opened. 2 men in dark suits, state investigators, present at Margaret's invitation, paperwork in hand since Monday, moved up the center aisle. Sheriff Whitaker reached instinctively for his badge. He did not get there first. The lead investigator unclipped it from his uniform and laid it on the desk in front of the mayor. Mayor Brooks did not move at all. His wife was sitting in the 3rd row. She did not look at him. The investigators read both men their rights in voices loud enough to carry. Federal charges, wire fraud, civil rights violations under color of law, conspiracy to defraud the elderly. The list took 90 seconds to read out, and every second of it carried. Evelyn Brooks Sutton was writing. The recorder in her hand was running. By midnight, her front-page story would be filed. By Friday, it would be picked up by the Burlington Free Press. By the following Monday, by National Wire. Then, in the silence after, Ruth Ingram walked to the microphone. She did not adjust it. She had to stand on her toes. She looked out across the room, across the neighbors who had walked past her on the sidewalk for 40 years without nodding, across the clerk who had told her, "Not my problem," across the families who had lost their land in silence. And she spoke. "I just wanted to keep my house. That's all I ever wanted." A pause. "I'm glad some good came of it for the others." She turned and walked back to her seat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Frances Cooper, 81 years old, pushed herself up out of her wheelchair using both armrests and stood. James Henderson stood. Beatrice Walker stood. The grandson behind Frances stood. Lillian stood. Caleb stood. Gregory stood. The newspaper editor stood. The man behind her stood. The woman next to him stood. Within 20 seconds, 2/3 of the room was on its feet. Ruth Ingram sat in her chair with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the floor. She did not stand. She did not need to. The room stood for her. 3 months later. The thaw came late that year, but it came. Old Crow Road, paved now for the first time since 1989, ran clean and black through the green pines. Ruth Ingram's shack still stood at the end of it. Same rocking chair on the porch, same wood stove inside, same blue blanket folded on the back of the chair. But the roof was new now, real shingles, no tarp. The windows were new, no duct tape, no cracks. The wiring was new, the heating was new. Lillian had insisted on that part. Ruth had let her. She had refused to let them tear anything down. Restore, she said, not replace. Some things stay. The Ingram Neighbor Fund opened its small office above the Caledonia County Library that April. Ruth had not chosen the name. The other families had. She had argued against it for 3 days and then given up. The fund's purpose was simple: emergency winter heating, property tax bridge loans, and legal aid for elderly residents anywhere in the county. Ruth was its director. She kept regular hours. She wore the same pearls she'd worn to the town hall every day. The 23 families had their land back. Restitution had moved fast once the federal indictments dropped. Sheriff Whitaker was awaiting sentencing on 6 counts. Mayor Brooks on 9. Mark Brooks on 4. Pinecrest Holdings had been dissolved by court order in March. Caleb went back to Oberlin in February. He played his spring recital in April. Ruth sat in the second row in a dress Lillian had helped her pick out. Gregory sat beside her. When Caleb walked on stage, he found her face first. After the recital, in the lobby, Caleb hugged her for a long time. Then he stepped back and looked at her. "You hungry, Ruth?" "I could eat." "There's a diner around the corner. They make the worst chicken soup in Ohio. I want you to try it." Ruth almost laughed. They walked there together, slowly, the 3 of them. Billionaire, music student, 68-year-old widow from a Vermont shack. The waitress, who did not recognize any of them, brought 3 bowls of chicken soup that was, in fact, terrible. Ruth ate every spoonful. That night, back at her shack, she sat on the porch with the blue blanket around her shoulders and watched the last of the daylight leave the pines. The porch light, no longer swinging on a broken hinge, held steady. Down at the foot of the drive, the road, her road, plowed all winter now, paved all spring, ran like a promise into the dark. Ruth Ingram closed her eyes. She did not pray. She had stopped praying for things a long time ago, but she sat on her porch for a long time, and she let herself be glad. A few quiet images, the way endings are supposed to be. Ruth at her desk above the Caledonia County Library, approving a property tax bridge loan for a man she had never met. He left, not knowing how to thank her. She told him to pay it forward. Caleb on stage at Oberlin's spring recital, finding in the second row the woman who had wrapped him in a blue wool blanket on a night he should not have survived. Gregory Anderson at a press event in Burlington 6 months after the indictments, shaking Ruth's hand in front of cameras. He bowed his head just slightly when he took her hand. A small gesture. He meant it. Lillian on her own porch, reading the Caledonia Gazette. A photograph of Ruth at her new desk, the headline above it short and plain, "The Woman Who Opened Her Door." Lillian smiled the way old friends smile when the world finally catches up. And Ruth herself, on a warm evening in late May, on a porch that no longer needed repair, with a road that had finally been remembered. She did not pray, she just sat there and let herself be glad. If this story moved you, leave a like and tell us in the comments, who in your life opened the door when no one else would? Subscribe so the next story like Ruth's can find you too. Yo, open the door, free. Even when you got nothing left, even when life been hitting you from every angle. 'Cause sometimes the stranger you save, they the one who comes back to save you right back. The universe got receipts, trust 'em.